Okay, let's make sure. Okay. You're good. Alright. Hey guys, sorry. I always have to make sure now to see if my live stream is actually working appropriately because I've had too many times where I've tried to schedule stuff and even though it was scheduled, it just died on me. So that's not fun. Anyway. Well, howdy doody pals and gals. My name is Tiffany. If you're not used to this channel, welcome here. Normally, it's more of a gaming channel, but this is one of the special events that we have where we have story time. This is a choose your own adventure pirate story where people who watch the series or follow along on Facebook or wherever they're coming from, they can vote on how the story goes. So what I do is I write a chapter and then there's options at the end of the chapter and that will affect drastically where the story goes. Now our last time that we had this has been 3 months. I know it's been a very long time since I was last able to do it. Part of the problems, I got stuck. I'll be honest, I got stuck in the story. I wasn't able to progress where I wanted to, and I wanted to make sure I took the time to actually do it. And then it also takes time for the artwork. As you can see, this artwork that's on the screen here, I do all the artwork for it, so it takes me some time to put that together. And then there was some crazy stuff that happened with life in the meantime. So all of that joyousness kind of compounded it together where it made us get stuck. So that being the case, let me catch you up on where we left off on the story last, in case you guys don't recall. So last we saw, we have Jax, our main cabin boy, who got into a mess because he found a moonstone, and this moonstone is this thing that has activated a great giant octopus, which attacked his pirate ship, which he thought that they had a merman Kellyeth, who he thought was evil and stolen things and all this kind of chaos, and he's come to find out that actually Kellyeth has conscripted his captain and their crew to help him basically go undercover to see what has happened to all these young men and these boys who have been disappearing off the lands, and trying to figure out if this place where they've come to, which is the Hollows you see pictured here, they've been told it has something to do with this. So the last person that they had just spoke to was Lady Arista, who is the mermaid who is in charge of the Hollows, which actually is a chain of hollowed out mountains, because this is a world in which a great flood took place that washed out the majority of the world, and there's very little land left, and most of the realm is taken over by the mermaid kingdoms. So last we left off, Jax had just finished talking with the Lady Arista. They're trying to see if they can get him unattached to this moonstone so they don't have any more problems with it. And you as the viewers had 2 votes. You voted on what was the name of the giant octoid monster beast and whether or not Jax would ask for his friend Eason, who is the cook's help, to go find the candy, the Ruby Lips candy, which he was supposed to pick up for Sedona. Should he go look for it himself, or should he go ask for help, and what would be the name? So the votes came in, and the name for the giant octopus is Maria. That is the winner. Maria is the winner of the octopus name. And the second vote, you guys pretty much unanimously agreed he should go ask for Eason's help to go find the candy, which I don't blame you. Jax has been getting himself into a lot of trouble lately. Okay, so I want to make sure that I have covered all my bases here. Okay. So that is basically where we are now. Jax is going after to try to find Eason so he can get this candy. And I don't really want to beat around the bush any longer for those who are wanting to watch and not wanting to be bored by me just talking randomly. What I'm going to do is that we're going to get into the story, and I'm basically going to read through the story. You or feel free to speak to each other in the chat, talk whatever you want to do in there. And once the story's done, then we'll come to the questions that you can vote on yourself. All right, so let's get started. This is Chapter 6 for Ways of Captain Verity Jones. For such a large space, it amazed Jax how crowded it could feel. Every few seconds, a set of shoulders would glance off him, bouncing him into the next person. Thankfully, most people didn't seem to mind or even notice when he did so. They were all too engrossed with the bartering for their wares to pay any mind to the others pressing past them. Jax fought to keep his focus. Never had he seen such a stunning assortment of gadgets, foods, and trinkets. It was like being in an undercurrent shop multiplied by 100. Sweet and savory spices pulled on his nose, making his mouth water. Vibrant colors shouted at his eyes and demanded him to look closer. Jax clenched his fist and continued on. Once he safely had Sedona's Ruby Lips candy secured, then he could browse till his heart's content. Besides, the last time he let himself aimlessly touch shiny objects ended up with him getting linked to that blasted moonstone. Inwardly, he sighed. It really was a shame that they couldn't work out a way for him to keep it. A splash of red-orange appeared above the crowd of the bobbing heads, grabbing Jax's attention. That had to be Eason. He'd recognize that man's hair anywhere, and the factor that he tended to tower above most men made it clear. Locking onto the hair as its owner twisted their way through the vendors, Jax picked up his pace. Skillfully sweeping in and out of the clusters of people, Jax found the openings that let him close the distance. It also helped that the direction Eason seemed to be heading had thinned down on the crowd quite considerably. Jax started to raise a hand to get the man's attention when he saw a pair of ghillie guards step out of the shadows. Eason noted their approach to him and gave them the slightest nod. The guards then indicated with a tilt of their head to a path that ran behind the vendor's cart. Jax halted his pursuit, watching as Eason looked over his shoulder, then followed after the giant merfolk. A sour taste filled Jax's mouth as his stomach twisted inside. He shook his head and forced his feet forward. Surely it wasn't what it seemed. Eason hated the ghillies as much as any other well-seasoned pirate. Besides that, Eason was a good friend and incredibly loyal to Captain and the Sannleika. He needed to keep his thoughts in check and not assume the worst. Still, it also wouldn't hurt to quietly follow after and see for himself. Maintaining enough space apart to keep himself concealed, Jax quietly pressed down the shadowed path. Peeking around the corner, he caught sight of Eason standing with the guards a few paces away. Jax paused, unable to hear their conversation, but also unable to draw any closer without giving himself away. Eason's hand reached inside a rucksack he had been carrying and started to retrieve an item. Jax narrowed his eyes, attempting to get a better look. Slowly, the cook pulled a rolled parchment up. Jax's mouth went dry. One of the ghillies accepted the roll from Eason, unfurling it just enough to study its contents before rolling it back up and passing it off to their compatriot. The first man then untied a medium-sized coin sack from the side and handed it off to Eason. Heat spread across Jax's face, his shoulders tensing as he ground his teeth together. He forced himself to exhale slowly. He was still assuming there was only one way to know for sure if Eason had just sold off his map. Watching them go their separate ways, Jax waited a few seconds before following after the ghillies. If Eason truly was capable of treachery, confronting him would do no good. He'd just make up some lie about what Jax saw, but if Jax could get his hands on that parchment, he could find out for sure. Sticking to the shadows as best he could, Jax trailed after the guards, maintaining a calculated distance apart. The mermen steadily moved further away from the market, turning through a maze of tunnels that brought them down deeper into the mountain. The air turned crisp and chilled Jax's skin as he descended yet another set of stairs. His heart thrummed in his ears. The places he could hide if someone came upon him grew increasingly thin, and something told him that this particular path wasn't usually open to outsiders. Or at least normal Hollow inhabitants had no use for it. Jax had to hope that was the case because it'd be his best bet for remaining unseen. Pausing at a bend in the path, Jax crouched down and peeked around the corner. Past encounters of trailing people taught him it was better always to stay low. Most people, when checking behind themselves, started at eye level. Staying low meant you could dodge out of sight faster. Before his eyes sprawled another massive opening, but this time more cavern-like in structure, with a lot less carving flourishes or massive columns. It was also significantly darker along the edges, the most of the lighting coming from the chandeliers arranged down the center. Scanning the chamber, Jax spotted a small craggy inset in the far wall. It was just big enough for him to hunker down in. Studying the guards who slowly made their way deeper into the large space, Jax's muscles wound up in preparation for his hopefully quiet sprint to the inset. Voices trickled down the steps behind him, slowly growing in volume. The stone of the mountain distorted and echoed their sounds, making it impossible to judge how far away they might be. No time for second guessing. Jax swallowed hard and flung himself on, being sure to stay on the balls of his feet to minimize the sound of their impact. Keeping his strides long and fluid, Jax slid into his hiding spot. His lungs burned, but he kept his breath slow and soft. He may have been out of obvious view, but if anyone looked hard enough, they would be able to find him, and the longer he stayed here, the likeliness rose that they would. Jax peered out and watched as one of the ghillies pulled open a massive metal door, while the other turned around and stood guard. Jax spit down a curse. This room was far too open for him to sneak past the merman without a distraction, and even if he did, there was no guarantee he'd be able to open the door without notice. If they left it open, he might be able to slip in, but how could he manage a distraction that left it open and unguarded? Jax turned his attention back to the steps into this chamber. Maybe it would be wiser to retreat for now? Get back into the main hall and find his mates and help put a plan together. But then the ghillies might have moved the map, and was he really prepared to oust Eason yet without all of the facts? Jax shook his head at the thought. Surely there was something he was missing. He just couldn't accept that his friend could betray him like this. Maybe Captain had some other secret scheme going on, just like she did with Kellieth.
It really is quite the astounding feat, not something the Lady Arista regularly shares with others.
A nasal yet masculine voice drifted into earshot as a pair of footfalls slapping against the stone floor grew in volume. Striding confidently down the stairwell and into the dim light of the chamber, the two men appeared. The owner of the nasal tone wore a bright red silk shirt with billowing sleeves edged in white lace around the wrists. His black trousers stopped at the knee, showing off crisp white stockings. The outfit alone might have tricked Jax into thinking he was staring at a Maslukan noble. Untrimmed mustache and bushy black brows, along with the sea-weathered skin, quickly dismissed the notion. The faintest glint of candlelight glistened across the man's bald yet well-oiled head. No nobleman would dare to go about so unkempt. Jax fought back a gasp as he recognized the second man to be none other than Simmons. Maybe he had read too much into what he saw Eason doing. Maybe this was all some secondary angle the captain had going. Or maybe Simmons and Eason were just conspiring together. That was a little too out there to swallow. As shocking as Eason's possible betrayal was, Simmons wasn't even a full-fledged pirate. He was far too decent a man for backstabbing. Besides, Simmons was the one who had handed the map off to him. Jax just couldn't see the logic in Simmons openly allowing Jax to hang on to it, and when he could have used any other manner of cunning to keep it in his possession without arousing suspicion.
I admit I am deeply humbled by your hospitality, Count Vespin.
Simmons spoke at last, allowing his eyes to drift around the cavern.
Call me superstitious if you must, but I'd really prefer it if we didn't progress much further without the presence of my personal guard.
Vespin held up his hands and bowed slightly.
But of course! Worry not, I am certain he will be joining us shortly. I wouldn't dream of pressing on if it left you uncomfortable. If you don't mind waiting here for a moment, I need to check in with the guards across the way. Be back soon!
Jax practically held his breath as he watched the odd little man scurry to the large door at the end. Looking back to Simmons, who stood patiently in place, Jax grew desperate to somehow get the man's attention. Simmons might be his only shot to make it to the other side of that door. Scanning around his cramped hiding place, Jax started to scratch and pry at the rougher spots in the rock. Seeing a small crack form, a grin spread across his face. Wiggling at the fissure, he chipped off a marble-sized pebble. Jax laid it in the palm of his hand and held it up to his eyes. Bobbing his hand up and down for a minute, he finally stopped at the best angle. On his right hand, he curled his middle finger so that the nail tucked tightly behind his thumb. Breath frozen in his lungs, Jax clenched his jaw and narrowed his eyes. Finally certain of the trajectory, Jax flicked his finger into the pebble, sending it whizzing through the air. A second later, Simmons flinched, slapping a hand up to his neck. Jax fought back a victory yelp and stuck his hand slightly out of the shadows. After noting there was no injury, Simmons looked around himself for his attacker. "Come on, man, over here!" Jax practically shouted in his mind. At last, recognition lit up in Simmons' eyes. About time. The cartographer cast a wary look back to the door at the other end before taking a meandering walk over to Jax's hiding spot. Trying not to draw attention to himself, Simmons casually leaned against the wall about a foot from Jax's position and kept his eyes forward.
"What are you doing here?"
he hissed softly. "Gilly's got my map. I'm trying to get it back." Simmons' posture stuttered slightly, but he quickly regained his composure.
"You're trying to steal another map? Kid, this is bad timing."
"No, not another map. My map. The one that got missing." "What in all of fate? How did Arista's people get a hold of that?" "Doesn't matter. Not now, at least. Can you get me on the inside of that big door?" Simmons went quiet for a minute before speaking at last.
"When Captain yells at us later, you're going to tell her I put up more of a fight."
Jax grinned. "Deal."
"I'm going to walk past your opening. Keep your gate tight with mine. If we stay along the wall, you might have a chance. Their candles need changing, so the shadows are greater."
"What about the door? Even low light can't help me there."
"Split off from me when I say. Hug the wall. I'll manage something to get you to it."
"Got it." Simmons casually crossed the gap that held Jax, keeping his stance wide so his clothing would billow just a bit more. Jax started in behind him, matching each footfall to better time his own. Simmons kept his gait leisurely and his demeanor disinterested. Jax's heart thrummed in his ears, hoping with all his might that no one would come up on them from behind. Their precarious dance whisked them along the outer rim, even though it felt like an eternity to Jax. At last they came to an especially dark section, which allowed Jax to peel off from Simmons and sink into the shadows. As Simmons pressed closer to the open door, Count Vespin turned to face him.
"Eager to be on your way, my friend?"
Simmons shrugged.
"Merely desiring to take in the craftsmanship around me."
Count Vespin's eyes trailed up the ornate carvings encased in the doorframe, hands on his hips like a proud father.
"She is quite the sight, isn't she? I've been told the very same metalworkers from Petzkiskan's Isle were the ones commissioned for it. The Hollows have a knack for drawing in the very best, as yourself, sire." "Just Simmons, Vespin. I am no nobleman." "As you wish."
Vespin dipped his head respectfully. A boy about a head shorter than Jax appeared from within the doorway, carrying a tray of goblets and a glass pitcher with him. Vespin's eyes lit up at the boy's arrival.
"Ah, just in time, Mr. Simmons. If you would, please join me in a special Hollow's Delight. This drink right here is usually only found amongst the merkind elite within their sea kingdom walls. Our benevolent Lady Arista has seen to sharing this secret with her most honored human guests." "Forgive my ignorance, Vespin, but I was not aware merfolk were capable of drinking liquids in their natural habitats."
The ghillie guard behind Vespin sniffed his annoyance.
"I meant no disrespect."
Simmons inclined toward the guard. Vespin laughed.
"No harm done, sir. We humans tend to be ignorant to much of our benefactor's world. The stereotypes can be tiresome for the poor chap is all, but they know you meant no harm."
Jax's heart thrummed in his ears as his muscles coiled like waiting springs. This tedious conversation only guaranteed that his map was growing farther and farther away. Simmons dropped his hand to his side, brushing his index and middle finger against him. Jax's breath caught in his throat. He knew that signal. Simmons had a plan, and he needed to be ready. The boy with the tray stepped forward to offer a goblet to the cartographer, but as he did so, Simmons moved to meet him, his hand just slightly higher than the boy expected. The lad tried to pivot at the last second, but started to lose hold on his tray. Simmons reached out his other hand to catch the tray, but smacked it into the boy's hand, which vaulted the full goblet back into the face of the guard. Vespin also tried to reach for the tray, but accidentally knocked against the server, bouncing him into Simmons. The three of them soon tangled together and crashed to the ground. The ghillie guard, still sputtering past the thick red juice in his eyes, did his best to blindly reach out and right the knot of humans below him. Jax sprinted with large, quiet strides on his toes, whisking in behind them before anyone was wiser. Once through the door, he was met with a view of a massive cavern and a set of inlaid stone steps that curved their way down to the large body of water. Far too exposed to this on the steps, Jax noted a number of natural rock formations about a 6-foot drop below him. With no time to waste, Jax crouched low and dropped himself off the side. Jagged stone scraped again across his shins and hands as he scrambled out of sight. Jax grit his teeth against the pain, forcing his breathing to slow down once again. Glancing at his hands, a few pinpricks of blood appeared. He shook them a few times and dusted them against his pant leg to help get his mind off of it. Jax let his eyes take in his surroundings as best as the low lighting would allow. While grateful for the darkness's covering, he was not looking forward to feeling his way through these sharp rocks. Swift feet rushed along the steps above him. Jax peeked out just enough to see the juice-soaked serving boy panically rushing further into the cavern. Probably wouldn't hurt to follow. Might be able to trick the guards into thinking I'm just one of the workers. Careful to not dislodge any clattering pebbles, Jax crawled along the side of the stone pathway. Sadly, it didn't take too long before the serving boy lost him, as the boy's path didn't have the same blockades that Jax's did. Jax did his best to memorize a spot where the boy ducked into one of the alcoves sporadically placed along the way. He bit back a frustrated growl at the increasingly difficulty to see anything. Even worse, his narrow trail beside the steps had thinned dramatically, leaving him with no choice but to climb back up. Counting the silence to ensure no one else was coming or going, Jax crawled his way through the crags to the lip of the stone steps. Hands gripping at the step's edge, he came face to face with a glowing pink and red flower that had pushed its way through a crack in the rock. The petals held an odd boxy structure in the shape of a starfish. Had he been anywhere but inside the hollowed-out mountain, he might have mistaken it for a sea creature. A sweet scent of cinnamon wafted from the flower, reminding him of his mother's old baking. The smell was so powerful it made his mouth water. Leaning in closer to the odd plant, Jax felt a tingling crawl across his nose and then traveled down the back of his neck. Shaking his head, he broke free of the flower's intoxication and pushed himself the rest of the way up on the stairway. Feet planted back on the smooth stone of one of the midway landings, a wave of dizziness shot through Jax's head, doubling his vision and threatening to knock him backwards. Bracing his hands on the top of his knees, Jax hunched over for a second, pulling in slow breaths, trying to steady himself again.
For Paskathan's sake, don't tell me it happened to another one.
A jolt of electricity shot down Jax's spine. Snapping his head up to pinpoint the voice, a second more forceful wave of dizziness slammed into him. Jax felt himself teetering backwards when a tight grip around his right forearm jerked him forward.
Show me your face, boy.
The voice from earlier growled out as a giant hand smashed Jax's cheeks together and roughly tilted his chin up. The man's own face blurred in and out of focus, but Jax wasn't able to make out anything more but the formations of scales on his brow. The ghillie's eyes roved Jax's face for a moment before he released a disgusted sigh.
Must have fallen off the side due to a starburst.
He spoke more to himself.
You're lucky to not have broken anything, dry skin.
He dropped Jax's face and switched the boy around to grab hold of the back of his shirt. The ghillie hoisted him just high enough that Jax's toes grazed against the stone steps as they went. A few moments later, the ghillie stepped off to one of the side alcoves set inside the stone. With a mindless toss, he landed Jax square on some spice racks.
Rest here till your head clears, then get back to work.
The ghillie called over his shoulder, muttering as he left.
Dense, dry skin. Third kid this week. When will they learn?
Jax lay face down on the sacks as the world around him slowly halted its spinning and twisting. The fog on his mind lifted but replaced itself with a pulsating throb behind his eyes. Breathing in deeply through his nose, he labored himself back into his sitting position. Shuffling steps drifted to his ear, causing Jax to look for their owner. Entering the alcove was the boy Simmons had toppled at the entrance. Red stains covered the upper three-quarters of his clothes, and his face flushed and twisted in a tight scowl. A pungent cloud of cinnamon scent hovered around him. The boy only half acknowledged Jax's presence as he strode past him. As he set to rummaging through some of the crates, Jax slowly pried himself from the floor. Shaking his head, he felt in control of his limbs once more. "You're not supposed to be here," the boy called out without looking up from the crate. Jax froze, hoping the kid wasn't talking to him. "Keep breathing. I'm not gonna out you." Jax winced. The boy was talking to him. The servant boy walked over to Jax and shoved a medium-sized crate in his chest. "You're gonna deliver these supplies for me, and I'm gonna keep my mouth shut for you. I don't care why or how you got down here. I got too much to do, and now I'm behind. Just no hurting anyone, okay?" It was an order, not a request. A small smile worked its way across Jax's mouth. Part of him wished he could take some more time to get to know this kid. Jax had a feeling he'd make an entertaining friend. "Where's this going, then?" Jax shifted the crate in his hands, working out a more comfortable position. "Follow the steps down till you see the pulley system. Load it up and send it to the top. Then do whatever it is you came here for." Jax nodded, then paused for a second. "You wouldn't happen to know any other way to get out of here other than the main entrance?" The servant boy had already turned away and began pulling out a pitcher from another crate. "You made it in. You'll figure out how to get out. Now go or you'll get me in trouble." Thanks." Jax dipped his head toward the boy, who half-heartedly waved him off in reply. Stepping back out onto the stone path, Jax's eyes roved about him as he went, scanning for not only his escape, but where exactly his map may have gone. A sinking sense gnawed at his stomach that he may have already lost his chance of ever getting it back. Not only may have he wasted his time, but it appeared more and more likely that he had gotten himself trapped. Maybe all wasn't lost. They were here, after all, to get information for Caliath. Who knows what he might find out down here? And unlike the others, he'd been able to make it here without prying eyes of an escort. Jax consciously slowed his pace to better allow himself to take in everything around him. Straining his ears, he caught on to the faint murmurings in the direction of the water. He couldn't lay eyes on the owners of the noise just yet, so he pressed forward, hoping the staircase would eventually lead him closer. Minutes passed by when the sound of creaking wood grabbed his attention. About 20 paces in front of him sat a cargo lift. This had to be the pulley system the kid was talking about. Drawing closer, a sense of hope bubbled up inside. The lift could easily carry him out of here. Not to mention the supplies already loaded could provide him the perfect cover. The stone steps diverged into two paths before him. Giving a cursory glance at the offshoot to the left, Jax could finally see the water's edge below. Docked at the bank were a handful of longboats, some crammed with crates that were being offloaded by servants and ghillies alike, yet others had lines of men sluggishly moving aboard. Jax couldn't make out any chains on them, and they didn't appear under duress, but the age ranges were eerily similar to those Caliath mentioned before. Unease twisted through Jax's gut, yet if that was what he assumed, then why would that count so openly bring Simmons and Caliath down here for a tour? Something wasn't right. Jax paused at the crossway, eyes dancing between the lift and the shoreline. Should he risk going further in to listen better? Or should he take his chance for escape now and report back to Captain? Jax had the sinking feeling that as soon as he chose one path, the second one would no longer be there for him to return to. All right, guys, and there we have it. That is Chapter 6 of Waves of Captain Verity Jones. Jax is yet again in trouble. Happens a lot to him. So what I need to know from you guys, you can put in the comments either here in the live stream chat, or if you're watching this afterwards, just put them in the comments on the video here. You can leave a comment on a post that I make on my Facebook page, Instagram, any of those kind of things. Just make sure you have somewhere where your vote is cast. So the first one that we're asking for you to decide, what path should Jax take? Should he take the pulley system up? Should he get out of there, get some help, report what he's seen? Or should he press his luck and go part 2 and investigate the boats and see what is happening down there, see if he can hear what's going on? What do you think? Should he do pulley system or investigate the boats? 1 or 2 for that. And option path number 2, who would you like to see more of in this story? Do you want to see more of the Gilly who called Jax a dry skin and seems to know something about the flowers? Option A there. Or do we want to see more of the boy who's just trying to get his work done and doesn't care who's around? The servant boy, option B there. So again, put your votes in the chat area, in the comment section, A or B for who you want to see more of, and 1 or 2 of which path Jax should take. If you need to catch up on the story, I'm sorry for spoilers if you're just coming into this one now, but this will be added to the regular live stream replay playlist that I have on the channel here. And my goal moving forward is to try to do more of these again once a month, as well as I'm able to. It's up in the air right now. We might move it to the first Saturday of each month. We will see. So, but there we are for right now. You guys let me know your votes and I will get started on the next chapter and see where that takes us. I hope you guys enjoyed. So thank you so much for coming out, and we'll see you next time. Bye!